Periodically, I find myself walking through cemeteries. If you're prone to doing the same, then you've likely also found yourself taking note of interesting graves and wondering about the lives underneath. Maybe this is because it's an exceptionally old grave. I'm always intrigued by a number of the older stones in our region, which are in German, less common but still seen are Hebrew, French, and yet some rarer yet inscribed in a Cyrillic script. Unique markers always stand out: sculptures, etchings, honorific plaques. In the older sections, there are always all the tiny stone lambs and other markings indicating a child. Their number is a painful reminder of just how banal some tragedies were, and only a few generations back. Other times, though, a common grave is set apart by its odd placement. There is the man who massacred his family with an axe before ending his own life. The folks in town dragged his body several miles behind a wagon before burying him just outside of the hollow cemetery grounds. His grave, marked by a large rock, was a favored space for public urination for nearly 100 years. There's two other cemeteries I've seen, both sitting in cornfields on a slight knoll, so that by August they disappear under waves of corn. One's outside of Williamsport, and the other is off an old blue highway hugging the Allegheny River. Looking toward the east at a creaking wooden hamlet and between the houses, you spot them on the hill among the fields, standing out there among the rows, like those underneath did decades past. There's something about a cemetery in the middle of a cornfield that is a distinctly haunting image to me. Bond and I went to a high school which had about a dozen graves between the intermediate and senior buildings. Our school was quite literally built on a cemetery. I'm sure that is a very common story, but in our case it was quite true, and they left most of the graves there. The graves laid flat on the hillside, just outside the window from my sewing and Latin classrooms. They were often overlooked, though, because they were those flat stones. The strangest grave I've come across, location-wise, has a story of horses, the devil itself, and the convolutions encountered when a person is sorting out property rights when there are multiple jurisdictions involved. Such is the story of Judge John Reddick's grave. So this story takes place in Beaver County, in the early days of Beaver County. If you're not aware, Beaver County is slightly northwest of Pittsburgh, and it's actually one of the older counties in the Commonwealth. A lot of the western counties outside of Allegheny County were split between, I think it's Lycoming and Allegheny County, around 1804. However, Beaver County predates that. Beaver County was actually formed early in 1800, the actual year 1800. I believe it was in March. Beaver County shares a border with West Virginia, that slit of West Virginia that runs north-south and is sandwiched between Ohio and Pennsylvania. I have no idea how that hasn't been annexed by Ohio, especially since I believe that some strands of that are out by Fallensby, West Virginia. I believe it's only 20, maybe 30 miles across. It's not a very wide section, and I can only imagine that if you were a state employee and had to go up to those counties, it might be difficult to stay in West Virginia and travel there. It would probably be a lot easier to cut across into Pennsylvania. This has nothing to do with the story, except for it is kind of a little bit important for you to understand that Beaver County and West Virginia share a border. So Beaver County comes into existence in 1800, and the Bar Association, the legal side of things, is established shortly thereafter. In 1804, Judge John Hogue Reddick is a lawyer there. Now, he is also a veteran of the Revolutionary War and a landowner in Beaver County's Hanover Township. And on that land, Judge Reddick had a bunch of horses, and apparently he raced these horses, and he had a circus, a circular horse track, on his land at the stables. Now, the facts of the matter is Judge Reddick would serve Beaver County as a lawyer, a judge from 1804 until 1830. At his passing, is my understanding. Now, we started talking about cemeteries, and that's because one of the most interesting cemeteries in Pennsylvania is Judge John Reddick's. And it also has to do with horses. Horses and cemeteries, and interest abounds. If you actually go to the cemetery, and this could be a little difficult because access to the cemetery is on private property, it isn't entirely remarkable at first blush. It is a walled-in cemetery. There's a lot of small cemeteries like this. I'm specifically thinking of one out by Moraine State Park in Butler County. I'm also thinking of another at the Ghost Town Petroleum Center. There's another dark sandstone walled-in cemetery, and there's only a couple graves inside. And Judge Reddick's is much like that. It's about waist high, maybe a little higher. I'm pretty average height. And there's his grave inside. But he was very particular about where his grave was placed. Another interesting thing for those history people, which I assume you're one, back in 1830 when Judge Reddick died, West Virginia was not yet a state. That was all the Commonwealth of Virginia. And in fact, that western border between Pennsylvania and the Commonwealth of Virginia was much in dispute. I believe we've discussed this a bit. Let's get back to what makes this grave so interesting, though, because again, dark sandstone walled-in small cemetery is pretty cool, but it's not the most exceptional thing. The exception is in the story itself. As I mentioned, Judge Reddick had a bunch of horses. He raced horses. The story goes that he was racing his horse and around the circus, and he claimed his horses were so fast the devil himself couldn't beat him, to which the myth goes the devil came up and challenged Reddick to a horse race. Reddick agreed. The cost, the price on the table, the ante, whatever you want to call it, the bet was that if the devil won, he'd obviously get Reddick's soul. If Reddick won, I don't know what he was promised, but some stories say gold, some say fame, others say immortality. I've heard this told a few different ways. The bottom line is they raced one night, one moonlit night, and Reddick was doing pretty good, but you know, the devil doesn't play fair, and the devil's horse is spitting fire from its nostrils. It's just this, you know, what's that line in Dracula, you know, for the dead travel fast, and Reddick loses. So upon Reddick's death, the devil is to collect his soul, and Reddick's aware of this, and using his knowledge of the law, he selects a gravesite, and he is very particular about the gravesite. What we do know is Reddick was very particular about the gravesite in real life. It wasn't just in the myth. And the gravesite was supposedly selected because it straddled the border between the Commonwealths of Pennsylvania and Virginia, that western border. The myth takes off from there and states that, being well versed in the law, Reddick had his body placed there so that when the devil came to collect in Pennsylvania, he would roll over to the Virginia side. Then the devil's got to go get all the proper paperwork from the Commonwealth of Virginia, upon which the initial Pennsylvania paperwork would have run out, and Reddick would roll back over into the Pennsylvania side until such time a statute of limitations would have expired. Now, that's a pretty funny story about a judge outwitting the devil. However, there's an addendum to this, because later on, sometime, I want to say around the 1850s, where there was a bunch of redrawing of the lines, and just as we continue to develop a better understanding of the borders and everything, continue to kind of galvanize that, it was discovered that Reddick's grave was entirely within the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. And it's not even close. It's something like 10 miles within the Pennsylvania borders. So was Reddick really trying hard to make sure that his body was consecrated on that border? and made a grievous error. I don't know. But the legend has also evolved with that. For today you can also hear that no, the devil wasn't outwitted and eventually collected Reddick's soul. Not content to just have his soul, or maybe to make an example or a lesson, he is said to have taken Reddick's soul and ride upon it like a horse, and ride him frothing at the mouth through moonlit nights in Beaver County, in western Beaver County. And some people claim that, especially on full moons or just particularly bright moon nights, that you can hear through the wooded hills of Beaver County the devil cackling as Reddick is thudding down the trails and streams of Beaver County. Judge John Hogue Reddick, most interesting gravesite I've come across, and again, not because of the grave itself, the language, the age, the statue-ness of it. It's just because of the story surrounding the person underfoot.